Hey everyone, welcome back to another hardware news recap for the last week. Lots of RTX stuff going on. Not sure if this video will go live before or after the reviews, probably before, but we have an RTX factory overclock lockdown to discuss, RTX assembly differences that we found, and you'll see in our previous two teardown videos of the RTX cards, Founders Edition cards, Gigabyte's advertising using our content without permission. That was an interesting, unexpected one. And then Intel reportedly outsourcing some of its 14 nanometer production to TSMC. Before that, this video is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly's high-end thermal paste and liquid metal. Thermal Grizzly's Cryonaut is an affordable, high-quality thermal compound that doesn't face some of the aging limitations of other pastes on the market. Cryonaut has a thermal conductivity of 12.5 watts per meter Kelvin, focuses on endurance, is easy to spread, and isn't electrically conductive, making it safe to use on GPU dies. Thermal Grizzly also makes Conductonaut liquid metal, which we've used to drop 20 degrees off some temperatures in our delidded tests. Buy a tube at the link in the description below. So first up here, RTX assembly differences. We have the teardown video where we go through the PCB primarily, and then the one where we took apart the cooler up separately, and hopefully we can have some B-roll of that in this segment. So what we found there, a few different things that weren't mentioned in that video. One of them, the thermal pads are different. So there are canvas thermal pads similar to the Fuji poly pads on our 2080 Founders Edition card, and we should have footage of it, versus the normal pads on our 2080 Ti Founders Edition card. So theoretically, the 2080s in this instance should actually be the better of the two, not that it really ultimately matters a whole lot. We're not sure why they're different, especially why they're different skewing better towards the lower end card. But most likely it's because NVIDIA is using multiple sources to get these cards made. And so it's either because these were made before they entered mass production, or they just didn't have the supply and switched thermal pad suppliers randomly between the cards, which is going to skew thermal results a bit. So we're not really quite sure what to make of that. We've reached out and asked NVIDIA why. Haven't received an answer as of filming this. And then additionally, there's an RGB LED controller on it. So we noticed when finally prying that top thing off, the part that was glued on that says RTX 2080 Ti, it's glued on like an Apple product. When we pried that off, there's an RGB LED controller under it, and the cable can support RGB LEDs, and yet the logo only outputs green. So a little weird. It seems like NVIDIA would want to jump on that RGB bandwagon, but for whatever reason, they've probably artificially disabled RGB LEDs, from what we can tell, because we know it's green, because if you look at the press footage from their own press event, all the stuff that's public now, you can see the cards running, and it's green LEDs, and it does not change color as far as we're aware. But it has the capability to, so we're not sure why they didn't enable that. And then finally, this one's extremely small. The 4mm hex screws that go under the backplate, which again, we have shots of that too, are black on the 2080 FE versus a silver color on the 2080 Ti FE. So it doesn't matter, but they're different. That's the three main differences we saw between them that we can talk about today. But moving on, RTX factory overclocking potentially locked down as discovered by Tech PowerUp, the developers of the extremely useful GPU-Z utility. If you don't use it, we highly recommend you download it. It is an excellent overclocking application it doesn't actually do the OCing, but it monitors all the thermals and statistics of your cards. So Tech PowerUp develops GPU-Z, and in doing their development for updates to RTX, they discovered that NVIDIA created multiple device IDs for new Turing GPUs, and working with this information and their own industry sources, Tech PowerUp was able to confirm that NVIDIA intends to recreate its GTX 1070 Ti scenario, wherein board partners were barred from making overclocking models of their GTX 1070 Ti's and had to stick to a fixed clock for all models of that card. So we recently showed the dies of a few RTX 20 series GPUs in our teardowns, and you'll notice that the naming includes things like K1, which that specific strain is an identifier of which memory module is missing as far as we understand now. They also contain a signifier of either 300 or 400 or some other suffix, and that's what Tech PowerUp found as a difference between factory overclocked and completely locked down chips for board partners. Tech PowerUp confirmed the following. Quote, when a board partner uses a 300 Turing GPU variant, factory overclocking is forbidden. Only the more expensive -30-A variants are meant for this scenario, or -300A probably. Both can be overclocked manually by the user, but it's likely that the overclocking potential on the lower bin won't be as high as on the higher rated chips. Separate device IDs could also prevent consumers from buying the cheapest card with reference clocks and flashing it with BIOS from a faster, factory overclocked variant of that card. Think buying an MSI gaming card and flashing it with the BIOS of a Gaming X. So to clarify, this doesn't look like an end user limitation. You'll still be able to overclock the card, but it's a limitation of what the board partners are allowed to do for factory overclocking, which means that the chip is probably lower quality, so you probably won't be able to overclock it as high if you're doing it as a user. And again, to clarify, it's the 300 ID versus 300A. One could argue that this is a good move, disallowing the board partners from differentiating themselves by clocks, but doing so would require you to say that, well, it ensures a certain level of chip quality for overclocking cards, and that this certain level of quality would allow you to sustain higher overclocks than the lower bin chips. It does not increase NVIDIA's yields, as far as we're aware, because they'd be selling those chips anyway. It's just that you'd typically rely on board partners to pre-test and sort them for performance, as EVGA does with their Kingpin cards or their Gaming Black cards at the lower end. On the other hand, this is a restriction on board partners that isn't necessary. We should trust board partners to do their own testing, and if they fail to do so, let the users find out from other media or other users and stop buying from that partner. If this locked clock variant exists in reality, and it probably does, NVIDIA is slowly chipping away at the advantages that board partners provide for this generation. It is almost certainly reality that NVIDIA is charging more for these unlocked GPUs which are sold to board partners for factory overclocking. And we'll link that article below if you want to read it in our show notes. You should also download GPU-Z if you don't have it. But kind of concerning, it's not necessarily a big deal. It's just that if NVIDIA is creating more 1070 Ti scenarios where all of the cards are the same, even for the clocks, the only difference is the cooler, most people don't overclock. So that's not something we really like, but we'll see what they do. In theory, they're selling higher end ones, but that might be what's partly driving up the price, because here's the problem. NVIDIA is now, whether they say it or not, and they won't, they're competing with their own board partners, because their Founders Edition card is a dual axial card. It's also one of the, really it's supposed to be a higher end card. And it's sold at $100 over official MSRP. But in reality, if you're selling to board partners these chips that are specially unlocked for factory overclocking, how much does that boost their cost? Does that put them above the Founders Edition cost? And then they also have to deal with the cooler, custom PCB, all these other things. So it's not unrealistic that board partners end up above FE pricing, and FE has a dual axial cooler, so the value they provide is now limited, and that's a bit of a concern, because NVIDIA this whole launch is behaving very much like Apple, and that's something we're concerned about. NVIDIA makes a good product. Their gaming products are largely uncontested. The prices on the 10 series are great right now for the value. So we like the present lineup of higher end products, barring things like the 1063 gigabyte and the 1030, stuff like that you already know about. The cards do fine. It's a good product. But the company is behaving in a way that's a little bit concerning, considering its rough 70 to 80% market share in the gaming market, because they have a lot of pull, and seeing that pull exercised in the ways it has been with Turing is disconcerting. So anyway, moving on. Gigabyte using our content as an advertisement against, well, actually without even asking us or telling us, and I have YouTube Premium, so I didn't see it. So some of you reported to us that you saw our Gigabyte RTX 2080 hands-on from PAX run as an advertisement on YouTube before content made by our peers in the space, like any of the other tech YouTubers. So we never authorized the use of this content. I'm glad you all emailed us or tweeted at us. Thank you for doing so. We filmed this content as part of our regular show reporting. It was a news report from PAX, from the show floor. So we were confused why it appeared as an ad, because that wasn't what it was. And after reaching out to Gigabyte, we found out that the company used our independently produced video, which was entirely our content, as an advertisement without our permission or even telling us. And we demanded, of course, that that be terminated. It was, fortunately, relatively quickly. So we've heard that this has become a common problem with YouTube reviewers. MKBHD had this issue with, I believe, his OnePlus review, where the company used his review as an ad. And it does boost the views significantly, but it doesn't benefit any of us, because you're not watching AdSense ads within the video, because it's already an AdSense ad. So we don't gain anything from that other than potentially a tarnished reputation, because now his OnePlus review looks like a paid advertisement, and the same is true for anyone else who ends up in that situation. I think Luke from Linus Tech Tips had that problem too in the past. So it's a problem, and it carries a few issues. A few of them are, for example, it makes the reviewer, like us in this case, look like we're endorsing a product, makes us look like we're endorsing the Gigabyte RTX 2080 that we showed at PAX, because they're using it as an ad, when in fact we've never used the card and have no idea if it's any good. So we don't endorse it. I'm completely neutral towards it. I don't know if it's good or bad. And then further, it makes it look like we were paid for that video, but in reality, we were at PAX to work on a panel and to do show reporting, which is what that was. So that's definitely not the image that is accurate or the one we want. Thank you, Gigabyte, for creating it for us. And then further, Gigabyte could easily film their own advertisement. This is the weird thing here. So they have the card. They have more time with the card. They could have a studio with the card. We were on a show floor and spent 10 minutes shooting it. So they could make a better ad than our 5-minute long video, which contains some criticisms of the product and an ad for another company baked into the video. A bit odd. So then you have to start asking, well, why would they run our content as an ad if they could make a better one? And the answer is, it's because, and it's the same for MKBHD, it's because they know that reviewers have credibility and carry weight, and people will see that reviewer and think that they endorse the product. And that's incorrect in this situation. We don't know if it's any good or not. So the company leveraged our position in the market to try and promote their own product, one which we presently haven't used, which is a huge violation of any sort of trust with us. And it also can tarnish the reputation of the media outlets, MKBHD, us, Luke, anyone else. So we want to be clear, we do not endorse the RTX 28 Gigabyte cards and have never used them, so we don't know if they're any good. Gigabyte did provide a public apology after the incident, and the letter reads, Gigabyte would like to issue a formal apology to Gamers Nexus for recently promoting one of their videos as a pre-roll ad on YouTube. Gigabyte was wrong for using content from Gamers Nexus without consent and have put measures in place to ensure this kind of situation is not repeated in the future. To be clear, the video was not sponsored by Gigabyte, nor should their coverage be misconstrued as an endorsement of Gigabyte's products or brand. Gigabyte has great respect for the work Gamers Nexus does to bring accurate and unbiased information to the enthusiast community. So, first of all, thank you, Gigabyte, and well, those internally who pushed for this, pushed for us to get an apology of some kind. We appreciate that some of the people there obviously took this issue extremely seriously, our contact primarily, and pushed to resolve it. So, thank you to the individuals doing that. And the company seems to understand it now, so that's good too. But if anyone sees our content, or really any YouTuber's content, run as a pre-roll ad in the future, be advised that we might not be aware it's an ad. And a lot of us as content creators have YouTube Premium, just so we understand how that works. So if you see it, please let us know via Twitter. And it's almost certain that it's not an authorized use of the content, so we'll get it taken down if you see it that way. But thanks for pointing it out to us. Issue's completely resolved with Gigabyte. They took it all down. They were pretty understanding once we explained the problem, so we're good there, but I did want to clarify for everyone who reported the issue. Next one, Intel is attempting to mitigate an expected supply constraint of 14-nanometer CPUs, as reported by Digitimes. And Digitimes also suggests that Intel is looking to offload some of their lower-end, lower-margin products, like the H310 chipset, to TSMC. By outsourcing the H310 chipset and several other 300 series chipsets, in quotes, this would allow Intel its precious fab capacity for higher margin products, which would no doubt be server-grade data center chips. As Digitimes notes, TSMC is already under contract for some of Intel's SoC and FPGA designs, so they would be a natural first choice, as they already have experience porting Intel's designs onto their nodes. Additionally, there is speculation that CEC 2019, or California Energy Commission regulations, could have some bearing on the move to TSMC, as California is set to have stringent new power regulations for PCs and other electronics. In saying that, Intel may find it appropriate to lean on an external foundry's lower power node rather than refining their own amidst a supply crisis. In a report by Semi-Accurate, the company purportedly obtained documents from HPE to illuminate the effects of Intel's 14-nanometer shortage. One such effect being a potential increase in sales of AMD's EPYC CPUs. The documents are internal from HPE and detail mitigation strategies for dealing with Intel being unable to meet demand for their Xeon Skylake SP CPUs. The most eye-catching among these strategies, and probably the most practical, is to, quote, offer alternatives. These alternatives would be the AMD EPYC-based platforms, the server ones. Last year, AMD and Hewlett-Packard Enterprise announced the ProLiant Gen 10 series of servers based on AMD EPYC. These are the exact models HPE would be recommending in lieu of models using the Intel Xeon SP processors. HPE, as well as other enterprise players, may be looking to AMD in the last half of this year to mitigate loss in sales while Intel struggles to meet demand. And for another brushstroke in the painting of Intel's misfortunes in supplying 14nm based chips is Intel-based laptop shortages, although they have an upside of potentially lowering DRAM prices. There could be a silver lining here. So for consumers, if you're not buying Intel-based laptops anyway, there's a report from DRAM Exchange, which is a leading memory price listing website, that shows OEMs are suffering from insufficient supply of Intel's new Whiskey Lake processors, yet another high demand part, and 14nm is exacerbating Intel's struggle to meet the unanticipated 14nm demand without 10nm support to back it up. So this constricted supply is set to disrupt laptop production, but it could lower DRAM prices. And these have been exorbitantly high for about 2 years now, even with price-fixing investigations going on in China and elsewhere. And there's a gap between production and sales here. With a decrease in laptop shipments, there will be hopefully an abundance of DRAM supply in the market, which could potentially drive down prices for fourth quarter 2018. It just depends on whether that supply comes to us in the enthusiast space or not. The next one, a new study concludes that ISPs are increasing throttling. So, why is this in the news? Is this? I don't know. This is news, apparently. ISPs are increasing throttling. So research from Northeastern University confirms what is really not surprising, which is that ISPs are throttling network traffic. The data, which is subject of an exhaustive study set for publish in 2019, highlights the trend of arbitrary throttling by many US cellular providers primarily. Throttling when network traffic is at its peak is one thing, but throttling just because is kind of a different thing, with no apparent rationale either, as the report indicates. What's more is the throttling tends to be aimed at video streaming services like YouTube and Netflix and even Amazon. ISPs are cherry-picking which network traffic to throttle, which is known as differentiation, a violation of the previous net neutrality framework struck down this year. The study finds that throttling is happening discriminately 24/7, even when the network appears to be uncongested. Often the big ISPs are the focal point of these issues, AT&T, Verizon, the Spectrum, Charter, but this study shows that smaller, lesser-known ISPs are happy to follow suit. Hughes Network Systems, a subsidiary of Hughes Communications, is actually a satellite provider, and according to the data, they're guilty of throttling Netflix to a mere 0.7 megabits per second. There's no reason to believe that rampant throttling won't extend to wired networks either. There were already many cases of that just before net neutrality was gutted, and many fear here that ISP behavior will go unchecked post net neutrality, including us, because we already deal with evil ISPs, and they're getting eviler, as it were. So next one, 52% of US gamers play on PC according to EDAR, EEDAR, one of the research companies that we've reported on in the past, shows a 2018 gamer segmentation report finding that 67% of Americans play video games. Seems kind of low, to be honest. And 52% of those gamers playing on PC. Additionally, the report also finds that 43% of gamers play on a console or designated device. And of course, some of these numbers can overlap because you can actually play on multiple things, not just PC, believe it or not. And mobile is still king here, accounting for 60% of the gamers, of the people who identified as gamers in the report. Not a big surprise there. The free version of the report doesn't dive into how many gamers play across multiple devices, i.e. how many PC players play on console or mobile, but it should be in the paid report if you're a market researcher and want that data. The numbers are interesting though, if only to rebuke the misnomer that PC gaming is dead, as it's been reported for the last decade now, and it serves as fodder for the PC versus console war. So feel free to use that link as you violently attack other people for enjoying something that you think is bad. Next one up, NVIDIA will introduce a scanner for automatic overclocks. We talked about this with Tom Peterson in our interview with him, but it's a new scanner that's actually the old scanner that's been rebuilt. So this is a a one-click overclocking utility. It launches a scanning program. It checks a bunch of voltage and frequencies, plots a curve for it, and theoretically builds a pretty good overclock that is based on performance characteristics. So you might have different clocks and frequencies depending on the type of load the application is producing, which is good because if you work with any kind of overclock and you're trying to do it quickly, you'll find that it's stable in one application but not the other. So in theory, Scanner is supposed to do that better, but in the past it crashed a lot, especially the EVGA version of Scanner. But they're trying to build a new one for 20 series cards. This is still one-click automatic overclocking, so as always, it might not, well, let's be honest, it's not going to do what manual overclocking would do. So if you enjoy manual overclocking, just keep doing that. But if you just want better performance and you don't want to put any effort into it, maybe it's worthwhile. It probably is worthwhile. We'll test it and we'll let you know. It was decent in the past. It's just that manual always did better, but automatic's not bad these days. Finally, hardware sales. The only one we lined up for now is AMD's Threadripper 1920X, which has been marked down pretty substantially from launch and will probably stay there at this point because of Threadripper 2. So if you want a CPU and you don't need it to be the newest and the best, it's a decent price. We'll link that below if you want it. Otherwise, as always, show notes in the description below or in the top comment. And you can go to store.gamersnexus.net to pick up one of our products and support us directly, like our GPU Anatomy poster or one of our shirts. You could also go to patreon.com/gamersnexus, helps out there. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all next time.